Patients who contracted hepatitis C and HIV from contaminated blood have condemned the investigation into the scandal as a whitewash. The Penrose report, which was 6 years in the making, concluded that few things could have been done differently. It did make one recommendation, that anyone who had a blood transfusion before 1991 should be tested for hepatitis C. Here's STV's chief reporter, David Cowan.
For years they've waited for someone to be held accountable, for someone to be blamed and to take the blame. And today, when that didn't happen, there were tears and there was fury.
We're doing this because of the money that's been wasted on a whitewash of an inquiry.
People infected with HIV and hepatitis C had joined relatives of people who haven't lived to see this day. A minute's silence was held for those who died after the NHS infected them with deadly viruses. The judge, Lord Penrose, is seriously ill in hospital. His findings were read by the inquiry secretary.
Some commentators believe that more could have been done to prevent infection in particular groups of patients. Careful consideration of the evidence has, however, revealed few aspects in which matters should, or more importantly could, have been handled differently.
When the judge's words expressed sympathy for what he called the forgotten suffering of clinical staff, the anger began to boil over. Afterwards, the charity Haemophilia Scotland had to appeal for CAM. Lord Penrose's name was removed from the lectern.
It might appear, on first reading, to be, as many of you have said, a whitewash, with frankly some of the chairman's assertions seemingly barely rational.
But he said the report laid out in detail what had happened, and they had to use that story to get action from politicians.
We owe it to all of those who have died and those whose lives have been turned upside down and continue to be every day of life.
For the first time, the report revealed that 2,500 people in Scotland were infected with hepatitis C through blood transfusions, and nearly 500 through blood products. Almost 80 acquired HIV. Andy Gunn was 7 when he was infected with the virus that leads to AIDS.
The health ministers in Canada, France and Japan, they got sent to jail for their part in it, but here they've got away scot-free, and this report is just it's just a waste of time really, yeah.
The principal demand was for an apology and a new compensation scheme for victims and their families.
We need the Scottish Government to immediately declare that they're prepared to set up a compensation scheme that will fully provide redress to every victim of this tragedy.
From London and Edinburgh, those apologies came, along with promises of better support.
And to each and every one of those people, I would like to say sorry on behalf of the government for something that should not have happened.
I think it's fair to say that the arrangements are not working well and are not supporting people in the way that they need to support them. So we've agreed that we'll take that forward initially anyway on a UK basis.
Lord Penrose did criticise the use of blood donated by prisoners in Scottish jails, a practice stopped in 1984, and delays in introducing a test for screening donated blood for hepatitis C in the early 90s. The Blood Transfusion Service has admitted that had that test been brought in earlier, huge numbers of people could have escaped infection. Are we talking about dozens or hundreds? Do we have any idea?
I would have thought it would be at least in the order of hundreds, but I would stress that that's a guess on my part. We're acknowledging that we could have tried harder to do that, and we're apologising for not doing so.
6 years ago, some of the victims predicted the inquiry wouldn't provide the answers they wanted. If the financial support they're given doesn't improve now, they'll feel let down yet again.
Well, earlier, Health Secretary Shona Robertson spoke to us from our Dundee studio. The people which this inquiry was set up to provide answers for feel very let down today. Can you understand their feelings?
Well, clearly this was an independent inquiry, and when you have public inquiries, no one knows what the outcome is going to be. It was an inquiry that looked over a long period of time at very complex issues. But of course, yes, I can understand how people feel it didn't meet their expectations of what they wanted out of the inquiry. And of course, when I met them today, I heard that very loudly. But what I also heard was desire to look at the next steps, and we had a good productive discussion about the focus now being on what happens next with the review of the financial arrangements, and it's very important that we get on with that and some other important things that the families wanted to see happen.
But why are there so few answers to what went wrong, and who was responsible?
Well, of course, the inquiry looked at all of the processes, what happened when over a number of years, and of course it looked at all of the very complex issues about what was known when, and some of the conclusions around that. And of course, these are very, very difficult issues, and of course the families were looking for more out of the inquiry. But one of the things the inquiry did do was to record the testimonies of a number of those affected in oral hearings, but also in written testimony, and that's quite important that that is recorded. But I absolutely understand and heard directly from those affected and their families today that they were disappointed at the inquiry's outcome, but also wanted to move forward with the next steps. And the review of the financial provisions is very important, because what I also heard today was stories about the hardship and difficulty that many of those affected have been trying to live with, and having to make representations to the financial schemes that were not supporting them in a way that they felt was adequate. So there is an opportunity moving forward to do something about that.
Yeah, I mean, some of the victims, there's been great unhappiness amongst them about the compensation and support being offered. Do you think changes are needed to the compensation structure then?
Well, these are financial schemes that operate at the moment. There's 5 schemes across the UK, so they're done on a UK basis, and we're keen to move forward on a UK basis if that's possible, but I'm not ruling out moving forward in Scotland if that's not possible. But what's important is we work with the families, talk to the families and those affected about what kind of support they require. It's very clear to me at the moment that that's not being provided, that people are struggling, and that's not fair and that's not on. So we want to move forward with that. I've set a time frame around that by next year's World Haemophilia Day we want to have concluded and got into a better place with those financial support mechanisms, and having families and those affected at the centre of that is very, very important indeed.
You're saying that people who've had transfusions before 1991 should be tested. How many people do you think will fall into that category?
Well, we actually think not very many, because there has been a lot of work over the years to trace people and encourage people to come forward. So a lot of people already have been traced that would have had transfusions before 1991. But obviously Penrose has asked us to look at that again, and we will do that. We'll have to work out the best way of doing that, and we'll be taking that forward. But I would stress a lot of people in that category have already been traced and have already been tested.
Okay, Shona Robinson in Dundee, thank you for joining us on Scotland Tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Well, joining us now is Bill Wright, the chairman of Haemophilia Scotland, who was infected by hepatitis C, which has left him with cirrhosis of the liver. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening, Bill. Emotions obviously running very high today. Now you've had more time to digest the findings. Is anger still your dominant emotion?
I can entirely understand how people felt today. I was there. When we first saw this report, we ourselves were frankly raging because we felt it was yet another betrayal, frankly. But we've since met with the lawyers. We ourselves have had time to digest the report itself. And I think you have to look at it in 2 parts. First of all, there's a very large body of evidence that was gathered together, including some of the testimonies. I myself gave a written statement, and about 100 or so people did in Scotland, and some people gave oral evidence. So you have to consider first of all the body of evidence there, and there's real grounds for optimism actually in that body of evidence. The problem is that normally with such a report one expects to see a list of recommendations and a list of conclusions, bullet point by bullet point. That simply doesn't exist.
So is the main failing then that there are no answers?
Well, the main failing is probably that part in terms of not having it clearly laid out. It's frankly impenetrable, this document in places. It's 1,800 pages long. And I think many of the people who were reacting today were simply reacting. They'd come up from England and Wales or wherever, and they were simply reacting to what they were hearing from the Secretary to the inquiry. They hadn't actually seen the document. The other problem with the document is that there is this large body of evidence, but then there's one man's opinion, Lord Penrose's opinion, on that body of evidence. Now, he is a very distinguished High Court judge, but it is one man's opinion, and that's what you get when you get an independent judicial inquiry. It's one man's opinion apart from government.
Why do you think that some people didn't find out about their infections until years later? Because we were hearing today, we heard it in Dave's report as well, some victims said that the health service knew about it, but they were never told.
Well, that's actually included in the body of evidence that I'm talking about. And in different parts of Scotland, that was for different reasons, depending on very often how the approaches were taken by the doctors in each centre. And it was sometimes the case that in the case of, for example, blood transfusion patients, if they moved hospitals or moved GPs or whatever, the GP would suddenly say, "Oh, I see you've got hepatitis C." And that would come as a complete shock to various individuals. The situation was quite different in various centres. In one Scottish city, there was, for example, 3 brothers who all found out together at the same time because a previous doctor hadn't actually told each of those 3 brothers the nature of haemophilia being it's a genetic thing and they'd all been infected. Other parts of Scotland, it took years for people to find out, and of course some of those people who had got HIV had then gone on to have sexual relations.
Do you think that the finger of blame should have been pointed at individuals?
Well, we get into very sticky territory here because there are different feelings about this amongst the haemophilia community and people who've been contaminated. Frankly, a lot of people just want to get this dealt with, get as much of the truth as is available, because of course many people have passed on, including some of the so-called experts have now left us. Recollections are becoming less and less clear.
Whatever has been in today's report, it doesn't change the fact that you and your fellow victims still have to live with the effects of what happened day to day. What impact has it had on you, Bill?
It's been almost 30 years, and I know my mother and father will be watching this tonight, actually. And for years I couldn't really tell them the full truth behind what was happening here. And I went through a very dark period in life where it took quite a lot of time to come to terms with that. I've moved on now because I've been with too many people that I've seen pass away. I've met too many people who've lost loved ones and who suffer incredibly bad health. People in wheelchairs, people who've lost their sight, women who've lost husbands who are having to sell up their homes. And there are actually a number of us out there who are now trying to take that energy and what energy we have left and point it in the direction of doing something positive about this and getting this to an end. And it was actually me that came up with the term World Haemophilia Day 2016, because what we have to do now is actually put an end to all this betrayal and finally come up with a solution. And I did hear what the Minister said there about the possibility of a joint UK settlement. We would prefer not to do that. We want a Scottish solution for what has been a particularly Scottish problem.
Okay, well, I know it's been an emotional and a long day. Thank you for joining us in the studio this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.